evening. How lovely it is to be able to greet one another at the beginning of spring. And yet in so many ways we feel as if we've missed so much of this year. And yet have we? There's so many experiences in life where we feel we've missed out. But have we? I can remember when I was at university in Res, exam times were not the happiest of times for me, and it felt like meal times were a particular ordeal. Usually meal times were fascinating because we could talk about various events, relationships, experiences of the day. But during exam times, there was such a hollow feeling because most of the day would be spent in isolation as we were studying, be it in our bedrooms, the university library, focused studies. And by the time you got to meal times, you'd either written exam or all you had done had been studying. And that was the last thing that one wanted to talk about was studies, and yet it seemed like that was the only potential conversation that we could have, as though the meals became more and more silent as our hearts, our emotions, our relational engagements were almost hollow. Everything seemed to be resting in our minds on the particular subjects that we'd been studying on. Are you feeling a little bit hollow at the moment? I know that for a while I personally have been feeling a little bit hollow because there seems to have been limited relational input. I hadn't realized quite the depths of what I find fulfillment in with engaging in people, in people's experiences, lives, in being with each other. And some of the hollowness comes from a feeling of, I don't have anything anymore to say. But is that hollowness an emptiness? Is it an absence? Or is there something else that is going on? I'm not convinced that it's a void. I don't think it's a void as in no other substance there. I'm wondering if this hollowness is a holding space for a potential of what is yet to come. So many of us as clergy have been saying, how do I minister in this context? We don't want to go back to what we were before. This is a magnificent opportunity to become what we've been talking about for so many years, a new form and a new expression of church. And yet we don't have the training of how to make this transition, how to be this new evolution of an organism that is far more relevant to a world that is shifting on its axis. And yet, amidst that inadequacy, that sense of not having been trained for this, I can't help but think maybe it's less about the formulaic institutional training that we would automatically go to, and more about going back to the primordial, kernel, relational beginning of our faith. You know, in the early church, those first disciples, those first apostles of the Christian faith, they didn't have training. had a role model and they had a trainer. The role model was Jesus. And they saw, they lived, they experienced, and then they took that and applied it within their context. They brought it down to the essence of what it was all about. And they allowed the Holy Spirit to train them, because their contexts were often highly variable. For example, Peter and Paul were very busy. Paul did a lot of traveling, and in a variety of modalities, in a variety of cultures, of educations, of languages. And so you can understand that he really relied on the Holy Spirit to train him how to be the faith wherever he found himself. Then you have St. John, who was in exile on an island. Very different training needs. And so maybe it's less about trying to find answers to the questions and the problems and the fears that we have in this new something. We don't even have a name or a title for it yet. And maybe it's more about returning to being ministered to by Jesus, about watching, about seeing what he relied upon, and then emulating those non-negotiables in his life and letting the Holy Spirit form us. So, just think of some of the non-negotiables that Jesus did. He stopped. He often stopped and took stock with God. He took a break from ministry and re-looked at things from God's perspective. Not needing to be ministry, it can be anything. It can be family life, it can be any work environment. To stop and take stock from God's perspective. He also seemed to inhabit this imperative for joy. Not as something that was synthetic, but something that was almost a cosmic holding space for everything else. So midst the suffering, midst the difficulties, midst the fears and the challenges, was this overarching joy, a joy in the Lord. St. Paul certainly seemed to understand that. If you think about it, he gave that imperative about rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. This was a man who'd been shipwrecked, whipped, cast away, cast adrift, starving at times, homeless, and yet. So how did he find this joy? Was it in the beauty of God in each moment? Because even in the hardest of moments, God is present, and that is beautiful, and that is a source of joy. In each moment of depression, in each moment of fear, look for the joy. It's there. It can be a puppy playing. It can be the sound and the smell of rain in this moment. That is joy. That is the beauty of God. So, let's not look to go back to what was. Let's not let that take hold of us. Let's step out and step into this hallowed ground of a hollowing out that isn't a void, that is the absence of what was in order to make room for what is already becoming. And let's do so with a sense of excitement that we have a wild God who really is infinitely creative. Do we believe that? Because if we do, then we can stretch out into this with confidence. Maybe even a certain level of brashness. And let's be wild in our ideas of possibilities. Let's throw aside the boxedness of our thoughts. Let the box fall apart. Let it dissolve. And let our minds roam beyond what institution holds as sanctified for us. Because the sanctification rests not in the grooves of the familiar, but in the holiness of God who creates all things new. So no, I don't know where we're going to go, but I do know with whom I'm going to go. And I do know who's going to train me up for this. And not only for me, but for you, for each of us. So take a deep breath. It's going to be quite a ride. Because every day is imperfect, but every day's imperfections are opportunities for new growth, for a new Pentecost, and for wonder as we are drawn into levels of trust that we haven't ever been challenged into before. But we're not alone, and we don't go it alone. We go with a sense of renewed appreciation for each other. And I look forward to that with all of us. Thank you for listening to some of what I am wrestling with in my own life. And if you have any thoughts about this, drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. And together we will discern where God is leading us, probably with a hop, skip and a dance. Good night and sleep well.